The photograph is small, faded, and almost easy to overlook. Two young people sitting close on a wooden bench, their shoulders touching with the kind of gentle familiarity that needs no explanation. One holds a hat in their lap, the other leans slightly in, as if sharing a secret meant only for the quiet air between them. At first glance, it looks ordinary, but the date on the back, 1912, changes everything. Because in that year, love like theirs wasn't just discouraged. In many places, it was illegal. Their existence had to be written in silence, their affection captured only in moments hidden from the world, preserved accidentally in a photograph no one was meant to understand. And yet, here it is, a story they could never tell, asking to be heard more than a century later. Behind every era, behind every revolution, every empire, every war, there were people who loved differently from what society allowed. And yet their names are rarely in textbooks, not because they were few, but because history chose not to see them. In the early 20th century, cities like New York, London, Berlin, and Paris had entire underground worlds, secret bars, coded conversations, symbols in lapel pins, handkerchief colors, hidden letters and poetry books, all used to find one another without being found by the law. Some lived double lives, others escaped across oceans, hoping for anonymity. Many carried the constant fear of exposure, of the knock on the door, the loss of a job, or the humiliation of a trial meant to erase their dignity. That was the story of a quiet schoolteacher in England whose letters to her partner were discovered after her death tucked inside a dictionary. They weren't dramatic love notes, just small observations. How the frost looked on the garden gate that morning. How her partner's laugh still replayed in her mind hours after leaving her house. How simply being understood by one person felt like rebellion. Those letters were never meant to be read by strangers. They were meant to survive only in the space between the two women who exchanged them. A space the world refused to allow them in public. Yet today, those words read like the diary of a life forced to shrink itself, hoping someday someone would understand what it meant to love in silence. There was also the story of a soldier in World War II who wrote to someone back home, never naming them directly, but describing their eyes, their voice, and the fear that the world might never let them be together. When he died on the battlefield, the letter remained in his uniform pocket, folded carefully. The officers assumed it was for a fiancée. They didn't know the truth, or perhaps they did, and simply chose not to speak of it. In times of war, when loneliness hangs heavy over every night, many found comfort in the most forbidden corners of human connection. But those bonds disappeared into unmarked graves, censored documents, and memories carried only by those who survived. Long before the word queer became a banner of identity, long before movements and pride flags and parades, people lived their love quietly, often dangerously. In the United States before the Stonewall Uprising of 1969, police raids were a constant threat. A bar could be wiped out in minutes, every name recorded, every reputation threatened. Yet even then, people gathered. Because hiding who you are is a kind of slow suffocation, and even one night of freedom felt worth the risk. There are stories of men who danced with each other by pretending to practice for a wedding, women who wore suits under their dresses, stepping into side streets to breathe for a moment, couples who rented 2 rooms in boarding houses, one for the world, one for themselves. They created entire lives between the cracks of society's rules, surviving in the shadows because the light was dangerous. And still, some created beauty. A poet in 1920s Paris wrote verses for a woman she could never publicly name. She published them under the guise of universal longing. A painter in Berlin captured the face of her lover in every piece she created, disguising her features among mythological figures. Musicians, actors, writers, many whose names we celebrate today, coded their desires in their work. It was the only way to speak without being punished. Many queer stories never became public, not because they were unimportant, but because entire societies agreed not to see them. The silence didn't erase them. It only buried them deeper. As decades passed, attitudes shifted. The mid-20th century saw a slow, painful transformation. Protests, riots, legal battles, and personal sacrifices made by people who had lived too long in fear. Stonewall wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. It was a refusal to hide any longer. Generations who grew up whispering found their voices. Lives that had survived in the dark stepped into the open. Some were ready for the world to change, others were not. Even today, acceptance is uneven, progress is fragile, and safety is not guaranteed everywhere. But what is undeniable is that the silence no longer holds the same power it once did. The photograph from 1912 reminds us of all the moments that history tried to erase, not because they were shameful, but because society refused to accept them. Countless stories, love stories, family stories, stories of courage and struggle vanished simply because the people who lived them had to hide. Yet many of their truths survived in fragments. A diary page, a coded message, a portrait, a rumor, a goodbye letter never sent. When we stitch those fragments together, we do more than remember. We restore what was taken from them. We give back the dignity they were denied. And so the question remains, how many lives were lived in silence? How many were forgotten because they didn't fit the world's narrow view of normal? How many moments of love, delicate, brave, ordinary, were erased before they had a chance to become history? The truth is that queer history was never small. It was simply hidden. And now, slowly, we are uncovering it, piece by piece, photograph by photograph, story by story. In bringing these stories into the open, we are not just honoring the past. We are reminding ourselves that history is bigger, more human, and more complex than the pages we were taught to memorize. These voices deserve to be heard. Their lives deserve to be seen. And their truth, once forced into silence, is finally finding its place.